So, what we're about to look through is pretty incredible. These are the actual internal documents, the real faculty handbooks and training manuals from a program called CEDU. This is like getting a peek behind the curtain, a way to see exactly how new staff were brought into the fold using their own words directly from the source. And this was the absolute core of it all. This mantra was the foundation of the entire CEDU philosophy, drilled into the faculty over and over again. You see, their job wasn't just to teach something. It was to become a living, breathing example of the program itself. And literally, every single part of their training was designed to make that happen. All right, so picture this. A new staff member shows up. Day one. The very first thing they get hit with is the official philosophy, the big aspirational promise of CEDU. And, on the surface, it sounded pretty revolutionary. Starting with the name itself. The name, CEDU, was presented as, well, they called it an anachronism, which is a little strange, but it stood for see yourself for who you are and do something with it. It sounds so active, right? So empowering. And that was the hook. Here, in their own faculty handbook, we see the exact language they used. They called their method experiential education, a philosophy that they said involves and stimulates the total child. They insisted education had to be personal in order to release the expression of the individual. The whole thing was packaged as this deeply caring and holistic approach. Their whole curriculum was built on this one model, the CEDU triangle. You've got your standard academics, a wilderness program, for building grit and resilience, and then at the very base of it all, the most important piece, emotional growth. The handbook makes it super clear that everything else, all the workshops, all the daily stuff, it all served this one goal. But okay, how do you actually turn a person into the lesson? I mean, you can't just give them a textbook and say, go for it. You have to mold them, forge them into an instrument of the program. And for CEDU, that entire process kicked off with a really intense training session they called the beginning wrap. And listen, this was not your typical HR orientation day. Nope. The beginning wrap training was a mandatory 12-hour ordeal, broken up into 3 separate 4-hour sessions. The whole point wasn't just to give you information. It was to completely rewire how you saw your job, turning you from just another employee into a facilitator of the CEDU method. And this is the actual overview for that training. And it just shows you how methodical this whole thing was. You can see the agenda for all 3 sessions laid out right there. This wasn't some loosey-goosey philosophical chat. It was a highly structured psychological boot camp with a script and very specific goals. So what was the whole point of these wraps anyway? Well, the training materials spell out the goals. And some of them sound pretty standard, right? Like teaching the philosophy. But then you hit phrases that just kind of stop you in your tracks. A key goal was to manage energy levels by allowing controlled emotional discharge. Another one, control violence. This language tells you right away that intense, raw emotional outbursts weren't just a possibility, they were expected, and staff had to be ready to manage them. And these wraps, they weren't all the same. The training details 3 different levels. You start with the standard wrap for just day-to-day stuff, but it escalates fast to the theme wrap, which was for tackling severe traumas. We're talking molestation, death, grief. And then finally, you have the issue wrap, designed to confront what they called underground threats. Staff were being trained to lead confrontations on the most deeply personal topics you can imagine. Okay, now this is where things get even more intense. The faculty, they weren't just taught how to run these sessions for the students. A huge part of their training and their ongoing life at CEDU was that they had to go through these intensely psychological, experiential workshops themselves. They had to actually live the curriculum. Just listen to this. This is a direct quote. Facilitators were required to read before one of their most intense workshops, the one called I and Me. I am an empty body, a perambulating carcass. I mean, this isn't Shakespeare class. This was required reading for a staff workshop, specifically designed to create this deeply unsettling existential vibe. And here's the facilitator's checklist for that same workshop. Look at the required posters for the room. You've got titles like Friday Night of the Fights and Perambulating Carcass. These weren't just abstract ideas, they were branded concepts, literally plastered on the walls to manufacture a very specific, very high-stakes psychological atmosphere. And it didn't stop there. The materials describe another exercise, this one called the nightmare rap. In this session, every single person in the room was asked, when did you start living your nightmare? What happened to your dreams? And then they had to do a writing assignment that started with the sentence, I began my nightmare when. Think about that. This was mandatory professional development. So once the faculty had been reshaped by all this intensive training, let's zoom out. How did this whole philosophy actually translate into the day-to-day life of the school? Well, the faculty handbook gives us the blueprint for a system of what looks like near total control. Every single day was bookended by mandatory rituals. You had first light at 8 a.m. for a centering and supportive start. And then the day closed with last light, where everyone had to gather around a hearth to end the day in a sensitive manner. This created a rigid structure that controlled the beginning and the end of everyone's day, all of it wrapped up in therapeutic language. And that control went right down to what you looked like. The handbook has these strict dress agreements, with the official goal being to de-emphasize social images. But the rules were incredibly specific. Boys had to be clean-shaven every day. Girls had to wear bras at all times. Hair had to be pulled back during ramps. The real point here seems to be stripping away any external sign of individuality to enforce this group identity that was defined by the school. So what was the faculty's ultimate role in all this? Well, the RAP Support Training Guide spells it out pretty bluntly, with 2 exclamation points, no less. Be the eyes and ears on campus. They were explicitly told it was their job to know the whereabouts of the children at all times, to observe everything, in the lunchroom, in the dorms, outside, and then bring all of it into a RAP to be processed. It was a culture of constant, total surveillance. Which brings us right back to where we started. All of these different pieces, the philosophy, the brutal training, the daily rituals, the rules, the constant surveillance, they were all in service of that one single mantra. You know, when you put all the pieces together, the purpose becomes crystal clear. The entire system was designed to do one thing, dissolve the individual, both the student and the staff member, into the program. By forcing the faculty through the same psychological ringer as the students, it pretty much guaranteed they'd enforce the system of total control without question. They really truly became the lesson. They were the living proof of the CEDU way. And that leaves us with a really critical question to think about. This whole system was built on this idea of turning a person into a living lesson. But what happens to both the teacher and the student when that lesson is one of absolute psychological and behavioral control? I mean, where do you draw the line between therapy, education, and just straight-up indoctrination? The orientation materials actually end on this one last stark quote from the CEDU philosophy: insight without action is worthless. At the beginning, that sounds like a powerful call to improve yourself, but after you've seen the machinery behind it all, those words take on a much darker and much more demanding tone.